Hello and welcome to the AIDEM Interactions. Once again from a very extraordinary location. We are now at the Mahmudabad Palace, which was originally built by Wajidri Shah in the 1850s. And then of course it came to the Mahmudabad royal family. And with me is a descendant of the royal family, but he is not just any other descendant. He is also a well-known academic, professor of political science at the Ashoka University. And of course, he is also a part of the Samajwadi Party. I mean, he claims that he is a worker, though we all know that he is a part ideologue of the party at this point of time. So, welcome to the AIDEM Interactions.
Thank you so much.
Ali Khan Mahmudabad. Of course, we go back a long way. But then,
we go back a long way.
Yeah. As I was telling, we go beyond the actual politicking that happens on a day-to-day basis. We want to kind of, move forward and look at the larger issue. So, Ali, how do you sum up the current socio-political?
What we are seeing now is the wholesale privatization of the state's natural resources. Everything from insurance to banking, to CEL, the electronics government electronic company, and of course this is going to impact ultimately something that the Constitution wants to protect, which is reservation. And so our fight is not simply an economic fight, it is also to give dignity to people and give them a chance for social mobility. The only way to do that in a pure system which is run on pure economic grounds, there are very few people who will be able to break barriers. The state has the responsibility in India to break those barriers on behalf of people so that they have a chance for social equality. That is becoming impossible with the BJP. In a sense, what the BJP is doing is it's freezing India as it is at the moment, and therefore income inequalities and disparities are going to increase, and that age-old fight, which is rich versus poor, as crude as that sounds, is what is boiling down to, except here, to distract you from that fight, you have religion, you have caste.
Yeah, but then it has been very effective in the sense, even if you look at the track record of the Modi government from 2014 to 19, it was not able to address many of these issues that you're talking about. And then there is also this argument that socialism has become defunct or has become unfashionable, that it's no longer a credible idea for political practice. So, in such a context, how do you advance the idea of socialism, or what does socialism mean for the Samajwadi Party?
See, so firstly, to your first point, I think a lot of people are also realizing that the communal issue is not putting food on their table. So, of course, it still exists, it has been spread in society, but at the same time, if you're not able to do basic things in society, then you simply cannot run an election on that. Keep running elections, it's going to lose steam. I think the BJP also has shown how it is trying to straddle too many worlds, because if you look at the speeches of various important leaders in the BJP, they are quoting more often Lohia, Ambedkar, Gandhi. No, of course, Gandhi ji has been reduced to a pair of spectacles on a wall.
This appropriation has been going on in the Sangh Parivar
for a long time.
Right,
for a long time, of course. But they are not talking about as openly Savarkar, Hegdewar, Golwalkar, Deen Dayal Upadhyay. Of course, that is happening also. So I think the BJP had already begun to compromise on its ideological core. So there's a lot of infighting within the BJP. We can talk about that another time, because there's a debate about to what extent is the BJP now compromised internally. Secondly, I think you're right, socialism in the way in which it existed earlier does not appeal to today's young people. But of course, as I spoke about the ideas behind socialism, there's a way to package them and there's a way to make them appealing to a young generation. This is a predominantly young country where a majority of our population is under 35. We're going to lose this demographic dividend. So, even this issue of privatization, let's say, it's not just an issue of socialism. It is not an issue only of protecting the character of the Constitution and reservation and so on. It is also about nationalism, because what you're doing is you're selling off state resources and creating oligopolies and monopolies and a plutocracy of sorts. Right? You're giving a small number of people huge financial resources, and ultimately that's going to not only hurt the state, but is going to hurt the average young person who are, as you're seeing, there's mass unemployment. You know, the joke now is that when PhDs are applying for chaprasi jobs in UP, right?
Yeah, but that even as these factors are there, see, I think, as social observers and political observers, one thing which we have noticed over the last few decades is that the way in which the Hindutva ideology and the sentiment, the larger Hindutva sentiment, which is of course quite divisive, how it has got, decentralized and got ingrained into the minds of people, especially the maybe, to put it rather crudely, the non-Yadav, other backward castes and the non-Jatav Dalits. And, there was a point of time when, when all sections, this pan-Hindu identity that Savarkar talked about, that's almost here now. So how do you, the point is, what you say about the core life issues is very, very correct.
Yeah.
But then...
No, so I completely agree with you, and I think, with all due respect, I think people might be, well, it's a provocative thing that I'm going to say, but I think that the biggest problem in India has been that there is a conceit in our liberal left politics. Now, I probably sound like a person from the RSS or something, but there is a conceit, and I'll tell you that conceit. That conceit is important because basically what has happened is that people have tried to make religion either a private issue, the liberal, that you do what you want in your house and are not too bothered, or socialism or communism sees religion as a step to overcome. The Pew poll recently and many other things, just basic common sense, show that religion is a deeply embedded category through which people view the world in our country, whether it's Sikh, Jain, Hindu, Muslim. So unfortunately what we've done is in the last 100 years, by completely ignoring religion as a category that provides a vocabulary for politics, I'm not talking about practice, theology, all of that, but in terms of using ideas that actually appeal to Abdul Haq or Ramchandra in the village in Sitapur, we have conceded that ground to organizations within Muslims or within the Sikhs, as you see in Punjab, or amongst Hindus that have a monopoly over, or they think they have a monopoly over religion. Yeah, just yesterday I was in Mahmudabad and I was making a speech.
I heard about it. I heard that you started your speech with a slok from Ramcharitmanas.
So yes, it was a doha from Ramcharitmanas of Tulsidas ji, and I said, I as a Muslim want to recite a doha from Ramcharitmanas by Tulsidas ji. So I said, if you look at Ram Rajya, then why wouldn't you want a Ram Rajya? Okay. But the point is, what is a Ram Rajya? Right? Gandhi ji had an idea of Ram Rajya. And of course, Gandhi ji was a product of his time. There are aspects of his thought that are now perhaps redundant, even then were complicated. But don't let people have a monopoly over Ram. Right? This new song that the BJP has given, हम उनको जो राम को लेके आए थे हम उनको लेके आएंगे. If you think about it, it's actually an offensive song.
Absolutely.
Because is Ram a little boy in their house that they're going to hold his hand? Which was a cartoon, if you remember, where it was going around in BJP WhatsApp groups. So Ram Chand ji, and this is very simple. It's very, it's not something that is very complicated. I recited this doha. काम कोह मदमान न मोह, लोभ न क्षोभ न राग न द्रोह, जिनके कपट दम नहीं माया, तिनके हृदय बसु रघुराया. So basically, in whose heart will Ramchand ji come? What kind of human being will that be? And Tulsidas ji says it will be a human who doesn't have jealousy, who does not have cunning, who does not have a temper, who does not have greed, machinations, and so on and so forth. Right? So you decide for yourself. The guy who's calling himself Yogi just now, is he a real yogi? And even for that, we can look at the Srimad Bhagavad Gita ji. And in the 6th chapter, 32nd verse, Arjuna asks Krishna ji, what is a real yogi? Who is a real yogi? And a very interesting answer. Krishna ji says, असल योगी वो है जो सबके सुख में अपना सुख समझे, जो सबके दुख में अपना दुख महसूस करे, और जो सबको समता की दिशा से देखे. So a real yogi is basically someone who treats everyone equally. Yeah. Same word I talked about earlier, right? Socialism, one of the main pillars of socialism is fighting a fight for equality and fighting for, or a quest for truth, to slightly change Ambedkar's quote, and a quest for equality is as important as a quest for beauty. Beautiful. Right? So equality is something we find in our religious scripture, except why are we not using it? The Quran talks about this, right?
No, in fact, I think there is a lot of debate about the new secularism that is required. In fact, there have been significant works. Like, for example, there is now already there is an attempt by the Hindutva ideologues, the new crop of Hindutva ideologues who have come up, like Vikram Sampath, to kind of undermine the very process through which our constitution has been made. And of course, from the left liberal side also, I mean, there are people like who kind of argue that that the classical conceptualization of secularism or the Western ideal of secularism is not acceptable in many countries of the world, I mean, developing countries of the world, and that we need to kind of look at. I think the Abhay Dubey's work, Hindi book, is a very significant contribution in that direction. So. Even if you believe that that the new Samajwadi Party, as you said, symbolized by Akhilesh Yadav as glue, has kind of incorporated or internalized these streams of new thought. But if you look at the way in which the slogans are conceived by the Bharatiya Janata Party and Sangh Parivar, the recent survey that we were talking about earlier, where all the controversial issues, and there was a survey which said whether it is a CAA, whether it is a Uniform Civil Code, even people who were not voting, about 74% of the people who are not voting for the BJP were in support of this. So this kind of slogan manufacturing, I would, for want of a better word, I mean, don't you think that that even with the new thought, the secular polity of this country has not been able to really cope up with something like this?
No, look, I mean, these thoughts are being conceived of as we go along. Any ideological fight is generally a long drawn out one until there's a trigger point or a catalyst that actually takes it to a next level. So I think everyone should be ready in this country for a very long term fight. I mean, regardless of the outcome of elections. I think what the RSS and the BJP have done is not only have they spread their ideology, but also they have captured to some extent the institutions of this country, right, at the lower levels. No one talks about the Vyapam scam now. That was one thing that gave you an indication of what was happening. And all these slogans that they're giving, I think you're right, they are very important emotional issues. They're going to run out of emotional issues, of course. I mean, now what Uniform Civil Code is left.
No, I think by the time the country would be different.
I think the country is already different, right? I think one of the biggest misconceptions at the moment is that this is a fight between secularism and Hindutva. I think we have completely misunderstood the problem. There are a set of circumstances over the last 100 years, and in particular in the last 20 years, that have internationally and domestically changed politics fundamentally. The BJP has managed, look, ultimately, if you look at the Sangh Parivar and its ideology, the entire thing is pegged on othering the Muslim, to some extent Christian, and in the old days communists, right? Yeah. These were the three enemies that they had, out of which Christians are now kind of negligible, small minority anyway. It's fine. In the south, there's slightly more antagonism than here because simply there are not that many Christians here. Communism is kind of almost defunct as a system. So the fundamental problem we face now is how to articulate and conceive of a new politics in the face of circumstances where actually our society has changed. You need a new ideology, as I was saying just now. You need socialism 2.0. You also need to have a new political frame for understanding these issues. That will take time, no doubt. And secondly, I think each community distinctly will have to conceive of a new form of politics. You're already seeing that. I think the BJP won the 2017 election promising the world to OBCs, right? If you look at the ground on what's happening at Allahabad University, they could not find a single person from a PhD scholar from OBC background to fill positions there. I mean, a single person in a state of 23, 24 crore people, they could not find a single person. The old fights are there. And of course, they made the OBCs also internally fight.
Yeah.
Of
course. They created the.
So I think people are waking up to this, and ultimately, the stomach, when it grumbles and rumbles, it does have its own logic. Sometimes you disregard that because you are taken in by the chamak damak and the star power of some ideological battle. But people are not, right now, especially after Corona, and the way in which this government behaved, and everyone remembers those images from the Ganga, there's a very serious problem. And there are basic contradictions people are also seeing now. I think the tragedy is in UP, we don't have a regional identity. And that is one thing to think about.
Right.
They spoke about trifurcating or making 4 states out of UP, which might be an interesting solution, because ultimately this has been a laboratory of caste and religious politics. In Tamil Nadu, in Gujarat, in Maharashtra, in Bengal, in Gujarat, Rajasthan, you have regional identity that can easily act as a counterweight at some level.
Yeah.
Here we don't have that.
But so, I think, right from the leaders of the freedom movement, I don't think that there were many advocates, of course, though this was mentioned in the Constituent Assembly about creating Harit Pradesh and all that. But then the majority of the people in the freedom movement, they kind of argued for the United Provinces. I mean, keeping it intact. And I think, it's also an interesting experiment in the sense socially and politically.
Of keeping UP intact.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is, of course, interesting, but again, caste, the two things around which politics have happened mostly in this state is religion and caste. And the big question, of course, is that whether caste is an antidote to Hindutva. That we can wait and see. You've followed Badri Narayan's work, The Republic of Hindutva. He makes very interesting arguments about the manner in which the RSS has worked amongst Dalit youth, amongst OBC youth, how it's tried to give a new identity to these sections of our society.
We have been talking about history and walking through places where the history of this country has very significant moments in the history of this country have been on these corridors of this palace.
Just actually, it's a funny thing that our walk ends on this note, because this is the room in 1916 where the Lucknow Pact was drafted famously, where the Muslim League and the Congress came together to present a list of demands to the British. So this is the room in which it all happened. Of course, most famously, the Congress was represented by Bal Gangadhar Tilak and the Muslim League by Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Yeah.
So those were those early days of the independence movement. Many other things happened here. From the garden here, when the Simon Commission was happening, they flew kites with black kites, and on the kites was written "Simon, go back."
Okay.
And there's kite flying is a big pastime.
Right.
Here, Gujarat, other places. Yeah. And so they flew the kites in a certain way where they would cut the kite and it would land on the path where Simon was going.
Okay.
So all these kind of things, Nehru and all the other big...
So interesting experiments in terms of political activity also.
Political activism and activity also, yeah.
But then if you look at your family, the point is that as 1916 onwards, this house has been part of the political activity in this country, the Congress, Muslim League. But then I think your family has an interesting trajectory. The people in the Congress were people in the Muslim League, and then now you have somebody in the Samajwadi.
Well, of course, I think in current politics, the favorite generation or the favorite person who a lot of people talk about is my grandfather, who was the treasurer of the Muslim League, and he went to Pakistan. And people bring this up a lot. But his father was the president of the Congress party. My own father was in the Congress and was MLA twice. And I'm in the Samajwadi party. So I can at least say that even though, yes, it is a political family, each generation we've made our own choices. And frankly, we have been given the freedom to also disagree or respectfully with what has happened in the past. Often I've had conversations in this very house about partition, about the freedom movement, my grandfather's involvement, and I disagree with his politics. But I think that's what's been a real, in a way, privilege is that we have had the freedom. Each of us have kind of carved out our own niche, and therefore we don't need to carry that burden or weight that a lot of people do. You know, I mean, I think today in today's politics, unfortunately, people feel the need to remain completely uncritical of the past.
Yeah.
Whether you're a follower of Gandhi, whether you're a follower of Savarkar, whoever's follower you are, the fact is these were all human beings. They made choices. They had a context in which they were operating. Context tremendously changed, and I don't think, you know, one of the things that occurs to me is the biggest injustice we can do to the future of this country and to the youth is to place the burden of history on them, which is exactly what the BJP does. Because ultimately all the BJP is doing is mining history for grievances. And there's no end of grievances. And of course, those grievances are decontextualized. You know, the time in which my grandfather was around was very different from the time that I'm around.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, it's a...
In very many ways, this place represents the plurality of voices that should be there in a country like ours.
Well, yes, very much
This
so.
very room and this building represents the plurality of voices.
Yes, well, I mean, and the other, I mean, I would also add that, you know, although this is my home, the other home I have is Udaipur, which is where my mother's from. And her father was not in politics, he was a career IFS.
Okay.
He was foreign secretary, his name was Jagat Singh Mehta.
Okay.
So, you know, this family and this house and everything within it represents the confluence of cultures.
Beautiful.
And I think India, in a way, if I may be presumptuous enough to say it, you know, my wife is from Kashmir, my aunts are from Bengal, one is Parsi, half Punjabi, I have a brother-in-law who's Scottish. I mean, I don't want to sound, you know, too cosmopolitan. All of these people are rooted where they are, but I think what has been the beauty of India is that it is a land of confluence. And if you start down the path of searching for authenticity, then I think that's a path that becomes very, very dangerous because it leads to rigidity, and you want to then, you know, how do you take apart cultures, languages which have become intermingled and mixed with each other. So confluence, I think, you know, we were talking earlier all this time about new ideas in politics. Of course, I think there's a role for our religious heritage. I think we've let it be monopolized by one group of people. But I think there's a huge amount of room for just this idea of confluence, like the Sangam, right? The Sangam is a beautiful thing.
The Ganga, Jamuna, Tehzeeb.
Where the Ganga and the Jamuna meet. Yeah. And it is a, you know, the Ganga, Jamuna keep their identities. Yeah. But there is a point in which they are able to meet before they go out into the sea.
Right. Anyway, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, Ali. And of course, we will continue the conversation.
Thank you so much.
We look forward to having you more often in the AIDEM
It will be a pleasure.
Yeah.
It will be a pleasure. Thank you so much.